Thank you, Bing. I'm so honored to be with you all today. I love today's theme, making connections, building unity, and inspiring action. It's all about moving forward. And so today I'll show you how the latest advances in data analytics now allow us to dismantle the Asian American glass ceiling once and for all. But we can't solve a problem we don't understand. So before getting to solutions, we'll peek into the fascinating science behind why the Asian American glass ceiling exists in the first place. First, though, you might be wondering how I worked it all out and got to where I am. So let me briefly tell you. It all started when I was a kid growing up in Maryland. That's me in the pink and white sweater, my parents, my brother, and in the middle, my grandmother, our nanai, who lived with us. Now, my parents had saved and sacrificed to buy a house in a good school district, which meant that we were the oddball Chinese in a school that was almost all white. One evening, I was about 13, my dad and I were sitting at home when he said, "Tonight's the night of my department's Christmas party." Surprised, I asked why he didn't go, and he said, "Because when I go to those things, I never know what to say to the people around me." It was like a lightning bolt had crashed down on my head. I realized two things. One, my old man and I had the same problem. We didn't know how to talk to white people. Two, I realized that this problem would forever limit his career and his life. It didn't matter that he was born in China, had made it all the way to MIT, where he had a master's in engineering, and now was the hardest worker in his department. In Dad's entire 30-year career, he managed one person, the blind guy, because we live in an ableist world and no one wanted to manage the blind guy. My mom, Shanghai-born, Cornell biochemist, 30-year career, never managed a soul. Me, I didn't just want to go to an Ivy League school and become a worker bee. So that night, I resolved to figure out how mainstream American society actually works so that I could get in there and make a difference somehow. Now, I wasn't sure that I could because at school I was so awkward. The Americans, we call the white kids Americans as if we weren't Americans too. The white kids, they were so carefree. I always wondered, how could they be so carefree? After college, I wanted to live in a place with more Asians, so I moved to Los Angeles. I kept on putting myself out there, and over time, I got better at connecting. Luck entered my life in the form of some incredible mentors, and then suddenly, at age 31, I was appointed Deputy Mayor of Los Angeles for Workforce Development. I spearheaded a coalition of business, labor, and media leaders to create programs which by now have expanded access to new skills and jobs for millions. From there, I was recruited to be a principal at the global executive search and leadership consulting firm Heidrick & Struggles, where I led engagements for Fortune 500 companies across North America, Asia, and Europe. And I started a blog in Chinese and English on the unwritten rules of the corporate game. The blog went viral, causing a publisher in China to ask me to write a book for women there. I wrote, "Do Not Marry Before Age 30, 30岁前别结婚, and How to Get Lucky in Your Career, 30岁趁势而为. And the success of those books launched me as a global career guru in China. I established a Beijing studio where we created online courses and social media which garnered millions of followers and brand partners including Olay, SK2, and Mercedes. Then the pandemic and the racial reckoning. I returned to the States and to grad school at Cornell to study organizational psychology and to earn a diversity and inclusion certification. Then I brought together leading experts in big data to establish JOYOUS, a consulting firm at the intersection of HR and technology. We use AI and analytics to help companies operationalize inclusion. So let's get to it. What is the Asian American glass ceiling? That's an important question because most Americans assume that Asian Americans are super successful, and many companies don't even include us in DEI programming. So I found it helpful to describe it as an age 30 problem. Yes, starting out in life, Asian Americans in general are successful. We get the best grades, we get into the best schools and the best companies. But then, around age 30, just when we should start to take advantage of all that education and hard work to take flight, we plummet from being America's highest potential group to its lowest. Our rate of promotion into management is less than that of whites, African Americans, or Latinos. We're 7% of the population, 12% of the workforce, and 1.5% of Fortune 500 corporate officers. So, as you see, the Asian American glass ceiling doesn't look like a slab of glass. It's more like a haze of air pollution. At first, it's hard to see, but over time, it stifles the career of nearly every Asian American. We're corporate America's best educated, hardest working worker bees. The implications are huge. In your early 30s, you could be losing out on tens of thousands of dollars a year. Going into your late 30s, 40s, 50s, that could rise to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Over your career, this translates into millions. And since in the U.S. wealth is built generationally, the lost earnings and opportunities are massive for you and your family. That's just the financial part. When you start out in life with so much potential and then watch your future shrivel, that can result in a huge amount of frustration, disappointment, and even shame. More broadly, the exclusion of Asian Americans from leadership across American business, government, media, and society means that our world has been denied the unique contributions that could have been made by entire generations of Asian Americans. So, why is there an Asian American glass ceiling? Because to succeed in corporate America, you need two things. First, personal capital, which refers to your education, skills, experience, and knowledge. But you also need network capital, the connections and influence you need to leverage your personal capital to have impact and move up. Here's why Asian Americans suffer from an age 30 problem. We have exceptionally high personal capital and exceptionally low network capital. Our high personal capital lets us excel as students and as independent contributors, because being an independent contributor is a lot like being a student. But around age 30, when it's time to move up, we lack the network capital necessary to ascend. Why? Well, it comes down to how human beings tick. In fact, psychologists have found that over 90% of the variance in our positive or negative impressions of other people is driven by just two factors: warmth and competence. Here, warmth doesn't just mean being nice. It means how helpful someone thinks you are. Why are these two traits so important? It goes back to evolution. Anytime you meet someone, you want to know, does this person want to help me or hurt me? And is this person capable of doing that? This is an extremely important insight. Most of us strive to show our competence, but the research shows that in fact warmth is much more important to how others evaluate us. You meet someone, you first want to know, friend or foe. That is much more primal and immediate than, where did this person go to school? By the same token, all of our stereotypes also fall along these same two dimensions. For decades, one of the world's top social psychologists, Princeton's Susan Fiske, and her teams have been plotting American stereotypes on this 2x2 chart, with warmth on the y-axis and competence on the x-axis. And they found that where a stereotype falls on this model reliably predicts people's emotions and behaviors toward members of that group. For example, homeless people are stereotyped as cold incompetent. They're members of America's despised outgroup. In the warm incompetent box are housewives and elderly and disabled people. They're the pitied outgroup. People respond by protecting and patronizing them. Now, of course, warm competents are the admired in-group consisting of white people, Christians, and men. People respond by following them and promoting them. And Americans stereotype Asian Americans as cold competent. In Dr. Fiske's words, Americans consistently perceive Asian Americans as excessively, perhaps threateningly competent and hyper-competitive. In fact, this excessively competent, extremely cold stereotype explains the current surge of anti-Asian hate and every surge of anti-Asian hate throughout American history. Because, as sociologists explain, When a society is enduring difficult conditions, majority group members who already are biased become especially likely to scapegoat and harm those perceived as cold competent. Stereotypes have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. If you're quiet, they might think, see, thinks he's better than us. If you speak up, they might say to themselves, thinks he's smarter than us. Each time, their brains will latch on to that confirming evidence and get a dopamine hit, thinking, yep, just like all those other Asians. In the workplace, Asian Americans, particularly Asian American women, suffer from something called role incongruence, meaning that the traits associated with us don't overlap with the traits associated with leadership. So when we do show leadership traits, the bar is set higher for us to constantly have to keep proving ourselves in order to dispel any doubt about whether we're fit for a particular role. As a result, organizations are less likely to promote us or to invest in our careers. There's another factor at play called homophily. Human beings are social creatures, and in large contexts like workplaces and schools, we splinter off into small groups or network clusters. These small groups are pulled together by forces of attraction, most importantly, homophily, meaning birds of a feather flock together. Group boundaries are enforced by forces of repulsion, meaning people within a group tend to agree on their negative perceptions or stereotypes of outgroup individuals. And here's the key. Anytime one group becomes more dominant in numbers, that group's networks become even more homophilous. Advances in data analytics in the form of something called organizational network analysis, or ONA, now let us see how these social dynamics result in differing career outcomes for members of different groups. It's like an X-ray into how an organization actually works. Last year, researchers at Cornell's medical school used ONA to understand why, although for years we've seen big increases in the number of women becoming surgical faculty in our country, the rate of women who are full professor has stayed constant at around 10%. What they found was really interesting. At the assistant professor level, where women and men are in more equal numbers, men and women had similar numbers of network relationships with the other gender. But at the full professor level, where men outnumber women 9-1, men had 164% more relationships with lower-ranking men than with lower-ranking women. The study concluded that given the overwhelming dominance of men at the top and the homophily they exhibit, women's careers will continue to suffer unless and until high-ranking men take deliberate steps to mentor, sponsor, and collaborate with women. Bottom line, thanks to majority group homophily in the invisible economy of network capital, the rich always will tend to get richer while the poor get poorer. Traditional HR practice is to hire individuals based on their personal capital and then leave it up to them to build the network capital they need to succeed. Now we see how this laissez-faire approach breeds exclusion for all outgroup members. Let's recap what we've learned so far. We've gained clarity on why most Americans hit the glass ceiling at around age 30, because our exceptionally high personal capital gets overwhelmed by our exceptionally low network capital, thanks to the invisible network forces of repulsion, including the cold competent stereotype and forces of attraction, specifically majority group homophily. By now, I've worked at the top of 3 industries on 3 continents. I'm starting to think about what we are trying to achieve here after all. And I think it comes down to this. As corporate leaders, we are here to unleash the potential of all of our people and to channel it toward corporate goals through inclusion. Today, I'll share with you a blueprint I've developed to guide you to dismantle the Asian American glass ceiling and operationalize inclusion in your organization. This blueprint builds on everything we've talked about today, and I developed it because I saw so many leaders get completely sidetracked when trying to create inclusion. Most leaders start down this path by investing a lot of energy into creating powerful statements on DEI, and then trying to cascade this change down through the hierarchy where it gets swallowed up in what I call the frozen middle of senior and middle management. What's interesting is most managers see themselves as inclusive. The McKinsey Women in the Workplace 2021 report found that 71% of white employees call themselves allies to women of color, but far fewer consistently take allyship actions. Why? Two problems. One, many people simply don't know how to be inclusive. Two, it's a systems problem. It takes extra time and energy to do the work of inclusion, and most companies don't reward this work. As a result, creating inclusion has become the unpaid housework of corporate life. And guess who's doing most of this unpaid housework? That's right, women. Senior-level women are twice as likely as their male peers to invest significant time and energy into creating inclusion for others. Women of color are even more likely than white women to be creating inclusion for others. When the work of inclusion is not rewarded, then doing the work hurts those who do it. And all of this hurts the whole organization and all its employees, because progress is rarely made on work that's not measured or rewarded. It's not surprising, then, that women have been burning out and leaving their jobs at record rates. Companies are losing the very inclusion leaders that they need most. The answer? We must enable and incentivize everyone to do inclusion work. By doing so, we can make our organizations happier, smarter, and more productive workplaces for everyone. That is the opportunity ahead of us. Progress requires accountability. Until now, though, we couldn't create accountability because we didn't have the right data. We had org charts, but org charts don't reveal how an organization actually works. We had engagement surveys and pulse surveys, which give insights on people's feelings, but they don't reveal the presence or absence of the relationships that lead to those feelings. So often leaders struggle to figure out how to use them. That's why organizational network analysis is such a game changer, by giving us a tool which can directly measure inclusion. In this case, O&A reveals that we have two inclusion champions, Elena and Lakshmi. So to help you dismantle the AsianAmerican Glass Ceiling and start unleashing your people's potential in the fastest and easiest way, I created this 3-step blueprint. And in case you'd like to have a PDF to follow along, you can download it at getjoyous.net/blueprint, or you can scan the QR code below. To get started, you don't need to get buy-in from the people at the top. You can start with your own group. As we go through each step of the blueprint, I hope you'll identify obvious areas of opportunity for your current situation. Step 1. After we've identified our inclusion champions, we can recognize and reward them. This is a huge opportunity, since these are the folks who are quietly right now creating inclusion all across our organization. So when we retain and secure them, then by extension, we make progress toward retaining and securing all those they're helping. We can celebrate our inclusion champions and groom them as future company leaders with special mentoring and training and fast-track career opportunities. By taking these steps, we send a strong message to everyone about our commitment to inclusion. Following that, we can do qualitative and quantitative analysis to pinpoint the specific behaviors our inclusion champions are using to successfully create inclusion. We can then create a vivid picture of which specific concrete behaviors create inclusion in our organization. And then we can tailor learning, nudges, and accountabilities to enable and incentivize everyone to create inclusion. Step 2. We can use O&A to identify our organization's untapped talents, those people who are highly talented but who lack the network capital they need to contribute fully to company operations. In O&A terms, they're called peripherals. Given what we now know about majority group homophily, it's not surprising that O&A peripherals are disproportionately Asian and other non-majority members. After identifying our peripherals, we have the opportunity to support and integrate them into company networks. We can pair peripherals with better connected peer mentors in structured programs which, in our experience, have led peripherals to be more than twice as likely to be pulled into effective collaboration networks in the future. We can strengthen and leverage employee resource groups, or ERGs, by resourcing them as hubs for training, peer mentoring, and other resources for their members. And recently, with COVID restrictions easing, we've been using O&A to motivate people to return to the office a few days a week. People who didn't want to go back just because the CEO ordered them to have been really motivated by knowing in the few days a week you do go in, the people who want and need to work with you will be there too. Step 3. We can also use O&A to identify those hidden leaders of influence who hold the real power in our organizations. In this case, company executives have designated 2 people, Mila and Austin, as high potentials. O&A reveals that as a boundary spanner, Mila is an internal leader, but that Austin is not influential at all. This is typical of our findings. About half of individuals on a company's list of high potentials are well connected with those above them, but not actually influential across the organization. Our work also uncovers another group of hidden stars, those people who are not known to company executives, but who are the true leaders of influence. Here, we of course have our inclusion champions, Elena and Lakshmi, and we uncover Felix and Sophia as central connectors, people who are like the glue that binds together people in a small group. Because they're deeply trusted by members of their groups, central connectors can speed execution or block change without company leaders even knowing it. Boundary spanners are the brokers of information who connect different groups. They're especially powerful since they can drive or block direction, alignment, and commitments across multiple groups. When we've identified our inclusion champions, central connectors, and boundary spanners, we can consider adding them to our high potential lists. This is exciting since our hidden stars are typically quite diverse, so we often get to immediately add more women and people of color into our leadership pipeline. More broadly, incorporating O&A into organizational processes allows us to de-bias all our succession planning. No longer must we rely on letting our managers identify who they know and like. O&A gives us an evidence-based ways to pinpoint which individuals are respected and trusted by our diverse workforce. Finally, when we've identified our hidden stars, we can leverage them to change culture. Our research shows that when culture change does occur, it does so not because leaders try to flow change down the formal hierarchy, but because the hidden leaders of influence throughout the organization enable the change. So, when we've identified these hidden stars, we can give them the training and incentives to activate the inclusion that we seek. Along the bottom of this blueprint are arrows back to the start with a box that says measure, iterate, and recycle. Because, as with all innovation, this process is not linear but circular. I hope you'll take this blueprint and discover opportunities inside of it for your current situation. Because the act of creating anything new is by its nature improvisational, creative, starting from the familiar and heading out into the unknown. It's the same with all science and all art. Guided by data, we use our imaginations. How will your organization change when you dismantle glass ceilings and enable and incentivize everyone to create inclusion? This is not a pie-in-the-sky question. You now have within yourself everything you need to get started. When I do this work, sometimes my mind wanders back to my dad, born in China, a refugee to Taiwan, who came to MIT and the United States with so much hope, so much potential. I wonder what would have happened if only his employer had created inclusion for him. If he had been allowed to fully contribute his talents, how far could he have soared? It's too late now for Dad. He died in the pandemic. But each time I remember him, I think of how awesome is this power we now hold in our hands to create inclusion. What's important to you right now? What do you want to achieve in the months ahead? How long have you wanted to break down barriers and create better and stronger career paths for Asian Americans and for all people? And how many times has this goal been pushed to the back burner? I know that after 2 years of pandemic and surging anti-Asian hate, many of us are grieving and tired and scared for ourselves, for our parents and loved ones. But let's not compound all the tragedy by failing to act. For 200 years in this country, Asian Americans have been the invisible minority, the perpetual foreigner. And right now, in 2022, thanks to big data, you and we now have the best opportunity we've ever had to turn the tide of exclusion and to lead our organizations to unleash the potential of our community and of all people. Let's get to it. And with that, Bing, back to you.